there's a concern, a question that I have, which is how much of this is driven by race, how much of this is driven by gender concerns.
Yeah.
I hear that she's not likable narrative all the time. And I mean, I know Kamala Harris, and I actually do think that she's likable. I actually do think that's not good. I know Kamala Harris, and I think she's plenty likable, and I think she's fine. There's a million reasons not to vote for Kamala Harris. Her personality isn't one of them. But I also don't base my presidents on how much I like them or how much I want to have a beer with them. Americans do.
Americans,
we absolutely do. And nobody
Bush was the guy you could have a barbecue with. Al Gore wasn't. Remember that?
Exactly. But now it's like we didn't want to have a barbecue with Hillary Clinton. We didn't want to have we didn't have a beer with Hillary Clinton. We didn't want to have a beer with Kamala Harris. Notice some patterns here of who we want to have a beer with and who we find likable.
Yeah.
In your estimation, how much of our visions of our candidates are skewed by or colored by these other factors?
Massively. This is the thing the Democrats get wrong, and the left in particular gets wrong. I see myself as someone on the left, but I've always been critical of the Bernie Sanders view, and I'm a big admirer of Bernie Sanders. But one thing I think the Sanders wing gets wrong is you give everyone health care, you raise minimum wage, you do populist economics, and you win. That's not enough, right? America is divided culturally, not just in class terms, but in racial terms. And for example, one of the things, Mark, is if lefties come along and say, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you that, for a lot of white working class people, that is coded as you're giving gifts to minorities. You're not giving it to us. You're giving it to the black folks. And I think that is a huge problem, right? Racial resentment is one of the key drivers of Trump's support. That used to be a debate in 2016. 9 years later, it's not a debate, right? Every academic study pretty much tells us that racial resentment, cultural resentment, a desire to go back to some imaginary golden age where white people were at the top of the tree clearly is what's driving a lot of the support for Trump. Like, that's been shown by academic after academic, study after study. You can see it with your own eyes at MAGA rallies, right? We know what's going on there. So I do think it's definitely, and it was a bold move for the Democratic Party to put a black woman in there when, the argument is these people are going to get even more worked up. Interestingly, though, Mark, I see some of the polling on CNN. I don't know how much to believe on polling front, is that Harris is actually, according to some recent polls, doing better with white men than Joe Biden was doing. Now, I don't know how true that is, but that's an interesting little twist that we saw on CNN.
Wow. I'm not familiar with that network you mentioned, but the polls sound quite
CNN,
interesting.
It's a small little TV network. I don't think you've ever been on it.
Yeah, nothing. Doesn't sound like anything I'd be interested in. But the poll is interesting. I'm actually seeing I'm seeing some anecdotal stuff and a few polls talk about black men being a base that's surprisingly weak for her. That white men, as you just pointed out, are actually a stronger base for her.
I think that's exaggerated, Mark. I just think, look, there's these polls that show that Trump is picking up more support amongst black men and Latino men than previous Republican candidates have, like a Mitt Romney or a John McCain, or even he did in 2016 and 2020. But, to be fair, and, Asted Herndon of New York Times and Van Jones at CNN have made the point that we're excited to get into a slightly kind of, I worry that we're getting into kind of, well, this is to blame then. And it's like, at the end of the day,
that's what they're looking
no matter
for.
how many black men go for Trump, no matter how many Latino men go for Trump, no matter how many Muslims go for Trump, overwhelmingly minority communities will still vote for Kamala Harris at higher rates than white people. Ultimately, Trump will win because of white people. And one statistic that everyone forgets, but it's at the core of American politics. The last time a Democratic presidential candidate won a majority of the white vote was Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964. He then signs the Voting Rights Act in 65. A Democrat has never won the white vote since then. Bill Clinton didn't win the white vote. Jimmy Carter came very close, but didn't win the white vote. Joe Biden, Scranton, Delaware, working class Joe Biden did not win a majority of the white vote. So it's a kind of to come along and say, well, Kamala Harris, of course she's not going to win a majority of the white vote. But the issue is the margins, right? How do you bring down the margins amongst college and non-college educated voters? But ultimately, if you're going to blame a group of people, a demographic in this country for Trump and fascism, you've got to blame white people, in particular, white men, in particular, non-college educated white men who are part of the base and who are driven by this resentment of the world has changed. And rather than blame billionaire oligarchs, I'm going to blame the immigrant. I'm going to blame the Mexican. I'm going to blame the Muslim. I'm going to blame the transgender kid. I'm going to blame whoever I can, except the people who are really screwing me over. And I think we need to be honest about that. I think we need to be honest about the double standards. Donald Trump just did a rally where he spent several minutes talking about Arnold Palmer's penis.
That was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in my life.
But all I have to say is, if Kamala Harris did a rally where she spoke for 10 minutes about a female tennis player's vagina in the locker room, what would have happened? Jon Stewart made this point on The Daily Show. What would have happened? It would have been 24/7 coverage. We would still be talking about it now, 6 days later. We all moved on from Trump. Trump gets away with stuff because he's the white dude. And by the way, one last point on kind of this country and how we see politics. We now know that one of the creators of The Apprentice came out recently and said, look, I'm really sorry. I played a role in giving the world Trump. We know that Donald Trump wouldn't have been president in 2016 were it not for The Apprentice. We know that The Apprentice created this weird aura and myth around a failed billionaire, fake billionaire, not even a billionaire, never did anything successful in business life, inherited money from daddy and burned a lot of it, went bankrupt 5 times. Right? This is the guy that The Apprentice created this aura around. And people were like, wow, I want the guy from The Apprentice. Americans love showbiz. They love entertainment. They love the idea of kind of the rich, successful person in the American dream. Trump is none of that, but NBC and The Apprentice gave us that in 2016. And he's rode that for a long time. Even today, people say to me, well, I interviewed a Trump supporter recently on Head to Head on Al Jazeera, and he said, well, he's not a politician. He's not, because he's a politician. He's president of the United States. But he still gets to kind of surf this, I'm anti-politics. I'm anti-establishment. Elon Musk is saying shit like, give it to the man, vote for Trump. Are you crazy? You want us to vote for 2 billionaires, Musk and Trump, and that's anti the system? Come on.
Yeah, that's classic fascist logics. I wonder about the media's role in this. I worked at that cable news network that you mentioned before. Now that
you did, I had no idea.
It just hit me. I've been thinking about Arnold Palmer so much I forgot about this other thing. And I remember in 2016 when we were covering the election, I was at HuffPost as well. And I noticed 2 things happening simultaneously there. At HuffPost, and you and I were at HuffPost at the same time.
Yeah, I was there too.
I remember they just didn't take it seriously. And at some point, the head of politics said, we're no longer going to cover.
Yes. Our good friend Ryan Grimm.
Yep. We're not going to cover Trump on politics. We're going to cover him on the entertainment page because he's not serious. And I remember saying, for the record, I mean, Ariana Huffington was furious at me. She's been furious at me like twice. That was one of them. You know, for me saying this. And I said, it's irresponsible. It's disrespectful to voters to put him on the entertainment page. He's a front runner for the Republican nomination at the time. But also, he could win. Yes. And they all said, there's no way he could win.
Don't forget, it was the black folks saying he could win. Remember?
Yes.
It wasn't just you, my friend. It was Keith Ellison who went on ABC with George Stephanopoulos, and this is in 2015, and says Trump could win. And everyone laughed. They laugh. I think it was They laugh out loud at the idea that Trump could win. And look, I put myself in that camp. It's not that I dismissed the racist, fascist tendencies in the American electorate. I actually thought I didn't really factor in the way the Electoral College would go in his favor. And to this day, I'm still outraged that Hillary won by 3 million, Joe Biden won by 7 million, but the elections look so close because America decides to make it about 40,000 people in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. That's not democracy in my understanding of the word.
Yeah, no, I agree. How much of it is we don't think he can win, and how much of it is we don't care? I remember, and I said that because at CNN all summer we gave Trump so much free.
Oh, yeah. And to be fair, Zucker admitted that later, right? That we shouldn't have just run empty podiums. Trump's come about to speak, all of that stuff. And look, 2016 was a media disaster. 2020, there was a slight improvement where journalists were like, all right, we're going to call out some lies. People like me and Jonathan Swan and Daniel Dale, all of us, by the way, immigrants, came along and kind of did some fact checking and tough interviews, the Canadian, the Australian, the Brit. And suddenly you saw American interviewers start to do a little bit tougher interviews and call out Trump stuff and the pandemic, obviously. But now I feel like in 24, we've gone back in time. I feel like the media is now basically waiting for Trump to use Tim Snyder's phrase about, the rise of fascism. They are obeying in advance, right? They're keeping their heads down. They're telling journalists to be careful what they say. You've seen the scandal at the LA Times this week, which has refused to endorse refused to endorse a presidential candidate. It was going to endorse, obviously, Harris. It's the LA Times, but the owner of the Times is a billionaire friend of Elon Musk's, and they're not endorsing a candidate. You're seeing at the Washington Post, where Will Lewis, the British dude brought in by Jeff Bezos, who Trump claims to hate, but Bezos wants his government contracts to stay in place. They may not endorse. So this is classic media obeying in advance. They're looking and saying, well, Trump might be coming back. How do we stay in his good books? We saw that at NBC, my old company, when they tried to hire Ronna McDaniel, and the staff at MSNBC, led by Rachel Maddow and others, revolted and they rescinded the offer. But they were getting Ronna McDaniel in for the same reason, to show Trump, look, we're not so bad. You can talk to us. Right. And I think that is a problem. To go back to your point, how many of the media organizations actually care if he wins or loses? Remember the famous line from Les Moonves, CEO of CBS News in 2016, Trump may be bad for America, but he's good for CBS.
Ooh, that is quite scary.